I'm enamored with modern tools. I really am. Let's suppose you were a carpenter back in the day, and you were quite a craftsman. You were building a beautiful table with shaped legs and so on. You would have to do that with you have to do that with a hammer and a chisel, and then I don't know. I guess they had sandpaper. I really don't know how they would do that. But what I know today is that they would do it with power tools. And you could end up with the same end result of a beautiful table. Mind you, mass produced in factories, maybe not so much, but by a craftsman, you could have the same beautiful table and get the end result, but it would take him much less time to do it with the modern tools. And that's the way things have become for us. Now, sometimes we want to do the easy thing and depend on the modern tools. YouTube, a relatively newcomer in the, 2008, something like that. And at first, everybody was scared of it. But then when we had home videos way back in the day, and there were, the Super 8 cameras and so on, and somebody had a video, you had to get a projector and then you had to get it. It was a mess to do that. I grew up with my father, who was quite innovative in his day, and this was before the days of the video becoming available to us. And he was a bit of an audiophile, and we had a reel-to-reel tape recorder. I had when I was young as well. It was with a 7.5-inch reels running it. I forget. But it was new technology, and people were amazed at the technology. But one of the things that happened all the time was that when he'd record somebody's voice and they'd play it back to him, they'd say, "That's not me," because it didn't sound like them, because the way sound works, it goes through, I don't know, technicalities of it, but the bones in your head, and your voice sounds different to you in your head than it does when it's actually recorded. Nobody says that anymore, because all of our voices have been recorded on home videos, on on their smartphones and other ways. We got used to the new technology. It seems that new technology is always a resistance for people, and sometimes it's to our advantage and sometimes it's not. Back in the day when I used to have, we ran a call center, and I would have up to 130 cell phones, if you could believe it, that I'd rent for a time-limited period, and we would call people on those phones and ask them if we could communicate with them about a new church. It was very effective back in the day, and also about raising money for missionaries. My cell phone salesman quit when they started to put cameras inside the cell phones. He said, nothing good is going to come of that. Well, a lot of bad has come of that. But at the same time, a lot of good has come from it. Right now, I'm not actually using a cell phone camera. I have a plug-in camera, but I could be using this camera. And it's actually a little better, except the internet sometimes is a little sketchy, so I'd rather hardwire things. I guess that's the old school in me. The video can be used for a lot of good. And so what happened was, a few years ago, particularly during COVID, people said, let's broadcast our service online so the whole world can watch. And what the research indicates is that the whole world didn't watch, although the reporting platforms like Facebook would say, oh, you had so many views. What they didn't tell you, that if somebody stayed on your video for 3 seconds, it was counted as a view. So you're thinking they saw your whole sermon, and they might have just clicked on past it, and nobody knows whether they stayed or didn't stay. Although there is a measure on YouTube as to how long you stay, and I can tell you that on average, nobody stays for the whole lesson today. Isn't that interesting? So this is very ineffective in reaching the people. They're not in the room. If they were in a classroom or in a church service, it's kind of like they lock the doors and it's too embarrassing to get out of your seat and go. Now, that doesn't mean you paid attention. And like me, when I was growing up, I was there in church every Sunday, but I never paid much attention until my later teen years, when I started to pay attention. The technology isn't the means to get things there. It's the human personality. And the human personality is best applied when it's applied face to face or kind of belly to belly across the kitchen table in some way where it's one to one. And it makes a huge difference. Now, what's that got to do with anything? Well, we're going right back to foundations. I've found that so many things are beyond our comprehension. In the email that I sent out telling folks about my lesson today, I asked them how many commands of Jesus do they recall? 5, 10, 100. Well, in actuality, because of the new software that I have developed and been developing and using modern tools, I'm able to tell you that I haven't fine-tooth combed it yet, so I'm not sure that you should quote me on this number. But so far, what I have learned is that Jesus used the imperative over 200 times. That's really quite impressive when you think that Jesus said, well, we're to teach everything I've commanded you. So what did he command you? How many commands of Jesus can you think of? And how many do you live up to? I'm fascinated by the fact that people say, oh, I want to be like Jesus. Yeah, well, what was Jesus like? For example, a large proportion of his encounters, as recorded for us in the Gospels, a large proportion, and again, I'm fiddling with the numbers to make sure that I get this as accurate as I can, because you have to go through verse by verse, and literally I've got well over 1,000 verses that I'm working on saying, does this meet these standards? Does he use the imperative? 555 it stands right now of Jesus' statements that we have from the Gospels. Did you know that? Why didn't you know that? You're saying, well, I want to be like Jesus. Well, you don't even know how many times he spoke or what he spoke and how many times he spoke to that to individuals and how it would apply only in that individual circumstance, or how it would be apply in the sense of an illustration of a generic, broader-based principle. I'm working on all of it right now because I never knew. And until recently, I'm astounded that I didn't know. There were over 200 imperatives that Jesus used in his teaching. Now, he doesn't say, therefore, you go and do that, but he said, follow my, he didn't say follow my steps. He said, follow me and I'll make you a fish for people. But other indicators, like from Peter and John, are like Peter said he suffered and he left an example that we should follow in his steps. And John said we're to live as Jesus lived. So they gave us those two clues, and others from Scripture as well, where Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. So the New Testament writers and the New Testament disciples, they got it. They said, well, I'm supposed to be like Jesus. So they apparently had a better understanding of who Jesus was than we do, because you didn't know how many commands Jesus gave. Unless you're smarter than me. I didn't know either until I used modern tools to find it out. Now, you can't get that on a Google search. In fact, Google searches create derivatives of what other people have said. And so if you do a Google search on how many commands did Jesus use, it will go out and find all of the websites where it talks about Jesus and bring you back a number, probably. Actually done a Google search because, frankly, it's worthless. It gets everything that everybody's ever said, and if everything that everybody said was wrong, then it'll get something for you that's wrong. And frankly, some of the AI platforms dwell on things like Google searches, other sources. I don't care about all those sources as a primary source. I do care because I pay attention to them. That's why I took a year to go through the training of the 12, and I'm going through Bruce's brain cramp, the master plan of Coleman's The Master Plan of Evangelism right now. And I got another book and probably a few others that I'll discover that I will go through to see if they align full square on what the Bible teaches. So it's important for us to understand that we have the capacity today that was never had before to use modern tools to take the inspired Word of God, and I believe that it is absolutely verbally inspired, and it's all true. Some of it doesn't match up to my way of thinking, but I rest completely on that. But I want to go back to those sources. So with this system that I'm developing called Jesus on Record, it has taken open source, free, so I don't violate copyright, translations of the Bible, and sort things out. And I go through verse by verse and say, is this right? That's a whole lot easier to delete some that don't apply than it is to find some that you missed as you go along. So I'm very pleased. Got well over 1,000 concepts that are in this software that I'll make available to you. And it will start out free and it will develop because I put a lot of time in. I've spent $1,000 this past month on artificial intelligence. I use that term, enhanced intelligence, to help me sort this out. It all goes through my filter, just like looking up a commentary who has to go through my filter. All of it is going through my filter, but I've got reams of material to still finish up on to make sure that I get it as close to accurate as I possibly can. I want you to pay attention. I want you, and next week we're going to talk about a reconstruction. There's a movement out there now with a lot of young people who are particularly, typically young people, who are disillusioned with the church and what's happened, and they're going through deconstructing. And the cultural faith that they've developed, they've said, oh, there were abusers, there was something, there's usually a triggering mechanism that says, I'm going to tear it all down. They tear it all down, but they forget to put it back together again. I have a friend who says, Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall and had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put, he learned it as a kid. But I know the king. I have a good friend who says that. I know the king who can put it back together again. And using the tools that are made available to us, we can put things back together again. Well, that's a long introduction to what Coleman in his chapter calls consecration. I didn't like the word. So I chose the word alignment. And a core verse that we'll build upon, and we're not, as I mentioned before, I don't go to the scriptures directly. I let you go to the scriptures and things that make it all work together. But Jesus said, if you love me, obey my commands. So which of these 284 apply to you? Well, you'd better pay attention and you'd better follow them. He expected his disciples would be aligned with him, and that's an impossible task. So Jesus said, I'm going to ask the Father on your behalf, as your nitwits, and he'll give you another helper who'll be with you forever. What a comfort that is, that the Holy Spirit is here working in your mind, my mind, our situation together so that we can actually get closer and closer to the absolute truth. Well, you know that we're building on the Master Plan of Evangelism by Robert Coleman. I highly recommend you get a copy of the book. They're still for sale out there. It is not in the public domain yet. It will be soon. 70 years after the person's death, I think, is the standard. There are lots of other things that you can still use that are still valuable, like the Training of the 12. It's in the open source. And by the way, I've got the 3-book series that's coming together. I got the first one. I thought I'd have it done by the beginning of January, and here I am. It's almost the beginning of March. And I haven't got it quite done yet, but I'm down to finishing up the cover and just proofreading it to make sure that it's good in modern language. It was open source. It's not copywritten, so I don't want to violate anybody's laws. And this I will make available to you. I'll make it available to you for free in a PDF format if you ask me, but it'll be for sale in an ebook format at a very affordable price. And it will be available to you as a print book, which I would highly recommend. Not so affordable at the $20 range. Well, it's still affordable, isn't it? It will really help you. And each chapter will have a quick summary at the beginning, 53 chapters of when you divided up all this stuff and a couple of extras that I added to explain what was going on. And every one of those chapters has a summary paragraph in a box at the top of the chapter. So if all you do is take about a half an hour, and go through and read those summaries, you will know more about Jesus than you know right now. If you're like me, and I've studied them all my life, I learned an awful lot from Bruce, and I'm learning and relearning and drilling down into Coleman right now. He's not as detailed, but Coleman rested on Bruce in a lot of ways. And I think that Coleman missed a lot of stuff. As I look at analyzing the raw material from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as to how Jesus worked with people, both Bruce and Coleman dwell on basically the training of the 12. And Bruce says he's doing that. Coleman says it's a master plan. Well, that might be a slight overstatement, and it's not a master plan of evangelism. It's a master plan of working with these individuals. And we're looking today at his chapter on consecration, which he called alignment. Jesus expected the disciples were going to do what he said. He said, follow me. So they did. And turn into people who can fish for people. And they did. That's what the book of Acts proves to us. He didn't pick people who were brilliant. He picked people who would actually follow and align and do what they're told. They were learners. I'm not fond of the way that they've written The Chosen in this, that Jesus, Jonathan Rumi, portraying Jesus, that's the image that people have in their mind. He calls them his students. He says with his accent, these are my students. And I don't know if there is a word that applies better. Students is better than disciple. Learners, kind of, it's probably a little too light, but they're devoted people who were picking up everything they could pick up from Jesus by watching what he did and by listening to what he said. And they were there observing, not all, but most of the encounters that Jesus had with people, and they learned about them later. For example, in John chapter 3, he talks to Nicodemus by himself. In John chapter 4, he talks to this woman at the well, two incidents that only John records for us, not Matthew, Mark, and by the way, did you know that? And it's highly likely that in the debriefing afterwards, particularly in the situation with the woman at the well, because the whole town comes out and the disciples have got to say, what is going on here? So there was some debriefing that they gained, but there's no evidence that they were there in the actual first-hand occurrence and encounter face-to-face with Jesus. But this loyalty to watching and pondering and working with him and saying, I got to pick up everything I can pick up. People love to follow great stars, and the kid gets to go and meet some rock star and they remember exactly what that rock star said and just was speaking off the top of his head. This is what the attitude the disciples had. We want to so-called this up. And that, in the end of the day, produced the character in them. It was a simple call to follow me. It focused on following. Following implied trusting in Jesus. It's kind of like when you were a kid, you played the game of follow the leader. And maybe they even put a blindfold on you. And you had to trust that the leader was taking you in the right direction. That's the concept here. If you really trust in Jesus, then you're going to trust in Jesus and you're going to obey him in everything that he said. And by extension, everything that the New Testament says as well. Matching up with much of the Old Testament. So, to follow Jesus meant that they were surrendering their agendas completely. There was no compromise. They were going to do it. In the first case, when they meet Jesus and it seems to go back to fishing, not because they're wandering away, but they're finishing up the business affairs at home, it would appear by some of the gospel records. In that going back to fishing, they were going from what they knew, and Jesus said, I'll take you from what you knew to a new way of viewing what you know. And I would encourage you to go back and reconstruct. We're going to work on that next week. We're going to reconstruct. What's going on in church is so culturally informed today that we really need to hit the reset button and get back to Jesus. In their situation where they were called to follow him, and it was quite clear they were to follow him in loving him so much that they would have to suffer. It was going to be difficult. So many people didn't like the idea that they had to eat his flesh and drink his blood, and they stopped following him. And that context, Jesus, Peter, as spokesman for the disciples, says, "Where else are we going to go? You got the words, you got the goods, the words of eternal life." And he thinned out this huge crowd down to very few to follow in the way of the cross. That's so important that we understand that to follow Jesus is to sacrifice your own agenda, not mix it up. It was quite interesting. Jesus said, "Give to him who asks." So I went to well, not my favorite, but I went to one of the artificial intelligence platforms, and I would really encourage you to use them as resource, not to depend on them, but to use them. And I said, "What did Jesus mean by this?" And one of the points it came up with was, "Well, that doesn't mean you always give to him who asks, because there might be a whole paragraph." And I just asked, "Where did you get that?" And it came back and said, "My apologies. It's not there. There's nowhere in the Bible that it says you get to decide who to give to." No, the recipient of the gift gets to decide. Why? Because he asks. So Jesus said you got to give to the one who asks. And it was quite interesting that even the artificial intelligence platform at first went out there, picked up some stuff that it got off of the internet or out of books or somewhere. They said, "Well, you got to evaluate." No, Jesus never said that. If it's true, you can't blame it on Jesus. And it's very important that you know what Jesus said before you start making decisions based on, "Well, it's a different day today." And that's what the Pharisees wanted to do. They want to say, "Well, there's different rules for different people." No, this is a way of sacrifice. And many turned back from him when they learned how much sacrifice was involved. And we use the term "count the cost." I didn't change this title because it's a term that's common to us. I don't know what the word count really means in this. I know what it means, but we must evaluate the cost. We must take a look, single, focused, with alignment to Jesus, and say, what is the price of this following him? And you'll find out that it costs you everything, even when you don't understand. And when I read a post today about a pastor who got laid off unexpectedly from his co-vocational job where he made his money, and he's pastoring the church. And he said, "Whoa, I got hit blindsided. They didn't tell me why. And I don't know what I'm going to do, but God is my provider." Now, he can say it theoretically. He's got to actually put it into practice on a day-to-day basis. The grocery store doesn't say, it doesn't say, "Oh, you follow Jesus so you can just go right on through and take your groceries without paying for it." They expect money at the grocery store, and he's got to find money for groceries next week. And he's got this idea that Jesus is his provider. Well, he'll find out the hard way. And that's part of counting the cost. You evaluate in advance, but you'll never know how much it's going to take sacrifice. And you will have the temptation, as we all do, to become embittered by the fact that I'm willing to do it, but nobody else is. I'm out there on my own. I sang the chorus when I was a kid. "I have decided to follow Jesus, though none go with me. No turning back, no turning back." It was a nice chorus, but the price of that seldom understood by a teenager. The commitment to follow through and say, that's what this means. And you'll find that when true disciples, people who are those students, those learners, those pupils, they actually put their whole life on the line and give up everything to follow him. But there's very few of them. And even Judas, the crowd's thinning out as he goes, and even Judas gets to the last minute and pulls out. Very few paid the price. The way you learn is to obey. The disciples misunderstood. They didn't comprehend at all, but they were committed They were aligned with Jesus as best they could be. They were seeking to follow him in every way that they understood, as much as they failed over and over again. And Jesus patiently, not sure about that, endured their immaturity. That's what Coleman says. There are a couple of occasions, I don't know how many, I'd have to look that up, wouldn't I? Where Jesus says, how long do I have to be with you, idiots? Well, he doesn't use the word idiots, but, they are a reasonable facsimile of what he was saying. It was the obedience that expanded their capacity to learn. And to be aligned with Jesus is to be a demonstration of love for him. If you love me, you're going to keep my commandments. Which commandments are those? You're going to follow him as far as you possibly can figure out he's following you. And every time we're disobedient, it exposes that we don't love him as much as we thought we did. We can easily define love as an emotional connection and an admiration for him. Love is something you do. Love is the way you act. And when you don't feel like it, you behave as Jesus did in the garden when he basically said, Father, I don't feel like doing this. I don't want to do it. And nevertheless, you know the story. Nevertheless. And you do what you don't feel like doing. You have to be the master of your own emotions, of your own circumstances. And friendship with Jesus is an obedient friendship. Now, Jesus modeled alignment with, and my meat is to do the will of the Father who sent me. That's what controlled his life. And it was tested even with Jesus, who'd never sinned. It was tested with him in the garden as well. He stuck it out, and he came to save others, not himself. And as you think about your life and you're saying, yeah, well, I follow Jesus. Do you? Do you come to serve others, not yourself? See, it's this alignment that builds leaders. Obedience forms the Christ-like character that you ought to have formed. If you want to say, oh, Lord, make me more filling the term, I have a list of 400 character traits for you. If you want to add them, Lord, make me more. The deal is you be obedient, and that will build in you. It's a battle that demands you discipline yourself, and you stop yourself from saying no to the things that you know you must do. So it's a battle. Coleman calls it, and the term spiritual warfare. I'm not fond of the term, but it is a war. It is battle, and when you show a day when you're indifferent, you want to do your own thing for an hour. You're just burning up oxygen, people. You've only got so much left. And you got to make sure that you focus and align yourself and realign yourself constantly. He knows that we're feeble. He knows we're made of dust. But he expects us to strive for perfection. Why? Well, he said, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. We got to restore this in the church. I'm beating up a little bit on it's enhanced intelligence. And we're on this platform, the one that I like the least, although it does some things very well. I asked it for a bunch of synonyms for obedience because I didn't want to use the word obedience. I didn't want to use the word consecration because I thought they came with too much baggage. So I used the word alignment, and that's where I got that from. It asked me because I've been asking some other things about this lesson and sorting things out from it. It asked this question, are you mainly using these, so the word you're going to pick, in a discipleship/leadership context, or also for general Christian life application? I thought, wow, where'd that come from? As if there's two categories of Christians here. Oh, I said, well, what's the difference? And came back and said, well, this is what it says about the general Christian life context. And I say a pox on it. This is all about, what you're looking at is a word that applies personally then it's personal holiness and moral choices. I don't know where he got that from. Everyday responsiveness to the Scripture and the Spirit. Well, okay, I could work with that. Trusting God in ordinary circumstances and trials. What's the difference? The ordinary circumstances of most of our lives seem like trials. A basic faithfulness as a child of God, not necessarily as a leader. So this is one standard of general Christian life contact. And then I said, now this is answering the question. What's the difference between, is this for leaders or is this for the ordinary people? So it says, well, in a discipleship or leadership context, it said, this is alignment, came back with my word, with Jesus' mission and character. It's not for the generals. A willing submission to spiritual authority for the sake of others, that's not for everybody. A training, discipline, and responsibility as a steward or leader. Don't we all need training and discipline? And don't we all take responsibility? There's a sense in which, whether it's in a big situation or a small situation, you're a leader. You're a leader every time you leave your driveway. You're leading in the way you deal with other people. I knew a pastor once who admitted to me that he was frustrated one day and he gave the finger. Why would he even know what the finger is? To somebody driving, that he felt so badly afterwards. Stop it. This is about all of us. And so they're saying discipleship is costly, intentional choices, cross-bearing, sacrifice, and example setting. Oh, that's just for the leaders, is it? Wow. Wow. Which part of the Bible did they miss? Why is it that this cultural Christianity that we've developed created a two-tiered system? And I'm saying to you folks, go back to the beginning and take a look at what Jesus said. And it goes on there. I'm speaking here. So the core idea is the same, responding rightly to God's will. But discipleship leadership language tends to stress mission, influence on others, and the cost of leading, while general Christian life language focuses on more personal walk and holiness. Where does it get that garbage from? I don't know. And so you've got to really be careful that you understand that Jesus spoke to one level of studentship with him, that all applies to all. Now, I said before, I found 284 commands of Jesus. This is how they break down according to categorizations that I did not create. The platform that I used, a good one in this case, sorted it out and said, well, these commands divide into these categories. I won't read them for you, but I just found that interesting. I haven't verified this. I'm going to go through one at a time and add and delete categories as we go through this. I got a lot of work to do yet before this gets out there in public, and it's costing me a lot of time, and it's actually costing me a lot of money as well, because you don't get the real intelligence that they've created for you for free. It's got to be in the paid versions. But these are the things that it's saying, and that's what I'm looking for, to see, well, is this command really about faith and trust? Or is it more about your character? Or is it about the community ethic? The interesting thing of what I just read to you in the side note part is that they're kind of claiming that, this is the general people. It's all about personal holiness. No, it's not. There's nothing in there what Jesus said that it's about only personal holiness. It's about personal holiness applied in every context of life. Curiously, we have a far greater propensity to say family first. Let's have a focus on my family. Jesus didn't focus on the family. I don't see why we should focus on the family. Does that mean he ignored the family? No. He didn't ignore the family, but he saw the Christian community of the disciples going forward. When he said, I'll build my church, he was talking about something that was unstoppable, because he is going to do it. Oh, wait. Do you remember the verse we started with? If you love me, keep my commandments. I'm going to send you the helper. We've still got the helper today. So I'm inviting you to build from the correct foundation. Just go right back to the beginning and say, where'd you get that? Do the research of the foundation. Make it a lifelong pursuit. Begin today, because today is all you have. And tomorrow is going to be just as busy. So take some time today, maybe not the whole thing, but take some time today to figure out how you can reset and follow Jesus. Then next week, we're going to look at the whole business of kind of taking a look at the world as we've created this mess in the church, taking it apart and putting it back together. All of that just springboarding off of what Coleman has said. Thank you, Dr. Coleman, who is, I believe, still alive and I believe 94 years old. Thank you so much for writing that book. It's helped me. It's helped thousands of others, but I want to pass it on, to put it into practice as best as I possibly can with the years that I've got left, and I hope you do too. Great day, and we'll see you next week. And by the way, if you're going to follow Jesus, you are going to pass it on. Pass this on, pass something else on. I hope you pass this on, but you got something better to pass on. Do it. Just do it, and do it beginning today.